I'll tell you what, man. Zaire Frankin is quickly becoming one of, if not my favorite player on the Indianapolis Colts. I mean, 45 tackles in 3 games. On pace for 255 tackles on this season. Now, save whether or not that pace is going to keep up. I know there's an extra game now as opposed to what there was a few years ago. And I don't know all the all-time leading tacklers for a given season. I don't have that list at my disposal right now. I suppose I could Google it if I want, but my point is that I don't need to look up that list to know that 255 tackles in a season is pretty damn good. And I think it's about time that we start making sure Zaire Frankin gets his flowers, because he is the personification of everything this defense is, perhaps even this team as a whole. You're talking about overlooked, underrated, underappreciated, playing with a chip on his shoulder. And I'll give you an example of this being overlooked and underrated. I was fortunate enough to have a conversation with the great Kent Sterling. I'm sure if you're watching me, many of you know who that is. This was about now a month and a half ago. And I, much like Kent, have never been wrong about anything in my entire life. But I did, at least when it comes to these Indianapolis Colts. And I did ask Kent if there had been anything over the course of all of his time covering the team, just one thing that he had been wrong about. Despite the fact he couldn't think of anything, he did humor me and try to come up with something. And what he had said was Chris Ballard built this team the way he would have built this team, off of high character and IQ. And ultimately, he was nervous or unsure that was the way to go about it. And what he mentioned was the fact that he's not so sure that you don't need some type of dog, right? Someone to just come into the locker room, really be vocal, animated, and galvanize the troops. And in that statement, he was overlooking a Zaire Frankin. And if you're ever looking to be entertained in the middle of a Colts game, now I know this game against the Ravens was so entertaining it doesn't matter, but in the case on a day where it might be boring, just keep your eyes on Zaire Frankin. And I'm talking about in between plays. I could think of a number of different moments this year where he has really set the tone for the team. I mean, you want to go back to D-Buck's fumble recovery for a touchdown in week 1. Remember, that was a play that looked like a dead ball, and I don't mean to give Kwity Paye a hard time, but Kwity Paye was ready for that play to end. He wasn't hustling that way. It was Zaire Frankin who came in, punched that ball out, and then D-Buck took it back, and that was ultimately a touchdown, with really an important touchdown in the game. Whether or not we lost is really besides the point. That was a huge play in that game. That was Zaire Frankin. How about this week against Baltimore? You had Lamar Jackson running out on what should have been a first down run. Zaire Frankin trips him up, shoestring type of tackle, and starts chirping to Lamar Jackson, and he meant it. And how about him chirping at Kenyon Drake? And I got to tell you, do you watch The Trenches with Zaire Frankin? It's his new podcast, and I'm going to tell you, I'm not just saying it because he's Zaire. I'm not just saying it because he's a Colt. Apparently he has some sort of relationship with Joe Budden. That's what I've gathered from the comments section. For those of you who don't know, Joe Budden, really a legendary podcaster at this point, rapper. I don't know if he still raps, but I know he still podcasts, and he's a legend of the game. He was talking about Zaire Frankin, going back to his show, The Trenches. Go ahead and check that out. It's a great listen. Him and EJ Speed and one of their friends who isn't on the Colts. Sorry, don't know his name yet. Mean no disrespect by it, but as a Colts fan, Zaire Frankin and EJ Speed, right? And he had mentioned, said no names, he had talked about this season, this training camp, a running back that they had brought in, and they were kind of, I hope I don't misquote his story, they were going through like drills at like 70% speed, 50% speed. Point being is they weren't hitting each other really hard. They weren't going all out. And this running back, who was only on his first or second day with the team, in this moment took the opportunity to shimmy, knowing the defense wasn't trying his best. And Zaire had mentioned how that really rubbed him the wrong way, and how he had to kind of let the dude know, hey, brother, that's not how we run things around here. Don't try to make us look bad while we're not out here running 100%. And I can't help but wonder, despite the fact he didn't say the name, if he was talking about Kenyon Drake, because, man, he had a lot to say to Kenyon Drake when he tackled him in this game. I don't know if you guys remember the moment. It might have just slipped on the wayside, but my eyes are glued to Zaire Frankin every time this defense is out there. And the physicality that he brings to this team, in my opinion, is the driving force of what we've seen out of the Indianapolis Colts so far. I can't help but think it has something to do with why JuJu Brents was able to come in and play the way that he played. What he brought to the table physically, JuJu Brents, I mean, this is a guy who was drafted second overall by Indianapolis, had wrist surgery, and ultimately didn't even practice at all until the beginning of August. I mean, he was so far behind. I mean, this team literally had him as a healthy scratch coming into the season behind a Darrell Baker Jr., who had been the bona fide number one corner through OTAs, training camp, preseason. And then here he comes getting benched, and JuJu Brents comes into a game after a week removed from the team saying they didn't think he was mentally ready to be out there. You want to talk about seizing the moment. I mean, that was absolutely spectacular. And on some level, I kind of credit Zaire Frankin for that. I'm not sure if that's out of bounds, but I just look at him as the guy that is the heart and soul of this team right now. And I just want to give him his credit. So I wanted to take today to really recognize this defense quite a bit. I feel like we talk about Shane Steichen so much. Anthony Richardson, of course. Even the Zach Mosses and the Jonathan Taylors have been a story. And people are starting to talk about this defense, but I do feel that I don't know, was a bit early on this defense. You could go ahead and fact check me if you want. And it's really cool to see them coming through on some of these expectations that I had for them, particularly the defensive line, particularly the linebacking core. Nice to see the secondary come in and play better than we expected. So I want to get into it, but before we do, got to introduce myself. You know what it is. My name is Justin. This right here is the Ride in the Bench Colts cast. Of course, if you're enjoying this at any point, go ahead, shoot it a like. It's going to help me get out to as many Colts fans as humanly possible. If you want to stick around for the journey, I'll be making videos all this season, all off season, all next season. For the rest of my life, I'll be 80 years old sitting in this chair. Hey, remember when we had Andrew Luck? That'll be me. You can subscribe if you want to be a part of that journey. But most importantly, just enjoy the video because it's a beautiful time to be a Colts fan. So I want to talk a little bit as this defense, the unit, because I mean, they have just been really, really good. I had thought this defensive line was going to be one of the top 8 units in football. They so far, we'll see how it balances out, have exceeded that. I mean, right now, mind you, I'm recording this during the Monday night game, so spare me if something changes as I'll release this Tuesday morning. We are tied for second in the league in sacks with 12. Now, I know some of the haters, I'm going to get ahead of it. Oh, you versed some compromised offensive lines. The Texans were missing guys. The Ravens were missing guys. Number one, that doesn't dismiss week 1 when we made Jacksonville's offensive line look like a scrub squad. And on top of that, what? There's injuries every single week in the NFL. We can't get credit for that. It's not like they had their backup offensive lineman in and messed us up. I mean, we made these guys look like backup linemen. We were disruptive. I'm not going to get mad at the defensive line for playing the hand that they're dealt and doing it at a very, very high level. So tied for second in sacks with 12 after week 3. Gus Bradley runs that 4-3 scheme, which makes this even all the more impressive because other than yesterday against Baltimore, historically speaking, Gus Bradley's not a blitzer. So when you talk about a team like the Colts getting pressure, what makes it even more impressive than some other teams in the league, the Steelers being number one, the Steelers have TJ Watt, who for all I know has 8 of them by himself. I've got no clue what that guy's done on the year, but I know every time I watch him, he's in on every play. But the Colts only rush those 4 guys most of the time. So that's true pressure. That's not pressure that's manufactured from a blitz. So that really speaks a lot to the defensive line here. And how about this? Tied for 5th in turnovers with 5. And going into the game against Baltimore, we were top 5 against the run. We allowed over half of the rushing yards we had on the season. More rushing yards allowed in that Baltimore game than in the first 2 games combined. And sometimes that just happens when you verse a guy like Lamar Jackson. But you look at this defense, and everyone that we needed to step up coming into this season is stepping up, and it's a beautiful thing to see. I mean, obviously, DeForest Buckner, Grover Stewart, we knew they were going to be great on the defensive line. They're living up to it. But you got guys like Kwity Paye, who was coming into a make-or-break season. He's got 3 sacks in 3 games. That's a hell of a start for Kwity Paye. Samson Ebukam, you want to talk about a monster signing by Ballard? I mean, Ballard right now, particularly after this Ravens game, you look at some of the guys that were making an impact there. Those were all Ballard moves, like really, really savvy transactions. Maybe that's a conversation for another day, but Chris Ballard starting to look a little smart in all this. I know it's early and I don't want to jump the gun, but Samson Ebukam is causing havoc, wreaking havoc. even a Taven Bryan, who is like our 5th, 6th, 7th guy on the defensive line. I mean, this is a guy with 2 sacks on the season, and he's making his presence felt as well. You cannot be happier with this defensive line. And if we're nitpicking about this defense, I mean, I guess the secondary needs to play better. But again, with JuJu Brents coming out playing like that, Dallas Flowers, to me, I mean, listen, when I look at a corner, if I'm seeing you a lot and hearing your name, that's a bad sign. Dallas Flowers is the type of guy you don't hear or see much of throughout the course of the game. And most of that is due to the fact that he's not getting his ass kicked out there. He's holding his own. So now you have JuJu Brents coming in playing like that. I still think he needs to catch up just a little bit on the coverage aspect of things. But man, he came out there like a guy on a mission. It was just awesome to see. And, you know, the most beautiful thing about talking about this defense is that I've gone this entire episode without mentioning the name Shaquille Leonard. And we know that Shaquille is not quite where he was, and we'll see if he gets there. But you know he's going to get better throughout the course of the season, and this defense is already playing as good as it is. The defensive line on another level. The linebackers between Shaq, Zaire, EJ Speed, I mean, is absolutely spectacular. I don't want to play the name game too much because I could go through everyone. I mean, this defense is a unit right now, and I think it's about time they're putting the NFL on notice. I mean, one of the most hysterical things was in the game against the Ravens coming out of the half, literally a minute into the half, one of the announcers, I forget who it was, said something along the lines of, you know, I think to some degree we underestimated this Colts defensive front. Well, yeah, no shit. You know who didn't underestimate this Colts defensive front? People like me, other Colts podcasts, because we were paying attention. This is a new theme I'm saying, and I always want to bring this up. Not always, but I'm going to keep bringing it up. Do not listen to the mainstream media when they talk about the Colts. They don't care. Indianapolis isn't a big market team. They simply are fair weather observers, and they only make observations when it's convenient for them. If you're trying to learn about the Indianapolis Colts, you listen to the fans of the Colts. You listen to the people who are dedicating their entire platform to this team. And that's all I have to say about that. This defense, make no mistake, is legit. What you're looking at is not a fluke, and it's not, I don't know, a fluke. It's not a fluke. Don't let anyone tell you that what you're seeing out of the Colts defense is some sort of aberration. This is who the Colts defense is. All the credit in the world to Gus Bradley. And again, Zaire Frankin for me right now, I don't buy jerseys often because I think they're pretty expensive and you can only wear them in so many spots. It's a jersey I'm considering getting. And yeah, I mean, that's all it is. I wanted to make sure Zaire's in the title of this video because I want to make sure he gets his credit. And good Lord, if you have not checked out the trenches with Zaire Frankin and EJ Speed, absolutely spectacular listen. That's the episode on the defense for now. Curious to see how this thing progresses because, I mean, obviously we're all high and mighty after this game in the Ravens, but a nice test versus the Rams in this upcoming week who have been passing the ball well and really just Sean McVay, a great offensive mind. We'll see how we look in that game. But until next time, my name is Justin. This right here is the Ride in the Bench Colts Cast. Drop your thoughts about this defense. Go Colts.